Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Dean, the first thing I'd like to say is I liked your introduction, and my immediate reaction was I want to get this talk over with so I can go down and say hello to everybody. Every time I come home and I see a crowd like this, I go from table to table, and the rewind button on my whole life starts working. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3. I think your remarks were terrific. I didn't know quite where you were going when you said my library was like the Old Testament and all those begat this and begat that. But it worked. You made it work. I appreciate it. I want to thank you for all your family has done for the center with the lecture series, and for all you have done to put Little Rock on the map and to make it a better place to be. I'm not sure any of us would be here today if it weren't for you. You believed in this project, you worked for it, and you stayed with it, and I thank you so much. I thank my longtime friend, Reverend Tyrone Broomfield, for the invocation, and thank you, Mayor Stodola, Mayor Hayes, Judge Valines. Rabbi Levy, thank you for the benediction you are eagerly waiting to give. I want to thank Bruce Lindsay and Stephanie Street and all the people at our foundation who work so hard here, and Skip Rutherford, thank you, and Dr. Sugg and all the people at the university for making the first few years of the Clinton School a success. I want to say a little more about that in a moment. I want to thank the officials who are here and those who are not. In his absence, Governor Beebe and First Lady Ginger Beebe, thank you. Governor Jim Guy Tucker, thank you. I want to thank my great friend Mary Steenburgen for being here. She's been a good friend to Arkansas too. She comes home every single time we need her to do anything for anybody. And she actually has a place in downtown Little Rock now. So sometimes I think we should send smoke signals to each other, because I can see Mary and Ted's apartment from upstairs in the library. I want to thank Jim Polchek and his team, Richard Alcott, Kevin McClurkin, Molly McGowan. I want to thank Ralph Applebaum and his team of designers who did those exhibits in the library. They once said, in reference to the comments Dean made, that I was absolutely the worst client they ever had, because they really expected me to be preoccupied with being president when we were doing this planning. And if they go away and come back 6 months later, if they changed one line on those drawings, I noticed it. And we had a wonderful relationship, but I think that this is an accessible, user-friendly, and highly educational presidential library. I had one goal in mind. I wanted people to come through this library and leave, and I didn't care if they were Democrats or Republicans, I didn't care if they were Americans or people from other countries. I wanted them to believe that decisions have consequences in real people's lives, and therefore that we should all care about the political system. We should all care about the policies. And I think they succeeded. I wanted this building to be light and airy and happy, and I wanted people to feel good when they were there, and I wanted them to feel free to absorb the information that was contained within the walls of the library in their own way. So I think they've done a great job. I think we ought to give them a hand again 5 years later. I think that. And lastly, I want to thank all the staff and of the foundation, the National Archives, and all the people who work at the center, especially the volunteers. I go, all over the world. I hope I can get through the speech today. In the last 2 weeks, I went to 9 countries in Europe and the Middle East in 9 days. I came home for 3 days, and I went back to Israel for a day and a half, and I got home at 3:30 in the morning, night before last. I think I know where I am and what I'm doing. But I go all over the world. People come to me in the most amazing places and start bragging on the volunteers at the Clinton Library and how they made them feel and how they wanted to be. So I want them to know that the rest of us know the operation wouldn't work without them. Finally, I want to thank Stephanie or Terry or whoever the heck I'm supposed to thank for making sure that no matter what God had in mind for today, we would be dry at this event. 5 years ago, that was a real character builder. I was trying to think of what the cosmic significance of the flood was. Some crank said Polchek's building over there looked like an elevated house trailer. And when it was raining, I thought, I wish it looked like Noah's Ark. It looked like we were going to need it. So I'm glad we're all in this beautiful tent. We've come a long way in the last 5 years. And I am very grateful. I didn't know that we'd have 1.6 million visitors in 5 years when we started. And that even in these difficult economic times with tourism generally declining around the country, the fact that we had an increase in attendance rates this year is truly remarkable. I wanted the school children to come to the library. More than 107,000 of them have, free of charge. We've had now 13 temporary exhibits with an amazing range of subjects, from music to Western movies to women in the Arab world who have given their artistic gifts to trying to change the future of their people for the better, to the, here my notes say eclectic motorcycles. That's a little, you shouldn't use a fancy word like eclectic about motorcycles. I like the art of the chopper a lot. I was honored that we hosted the Emancipation Proclamation and that I had a chance to view it along with the Little Rock Nine. I'm grateful that Sam Waterston and Harold Holster came down here and made the Lincoln presentation. I got to see the amazing collection of paintings from Peter Max. We've hosted the AIDS quilt, and soon we'll be planting a sapling from Anne Frank's tree. And I want to say this. This is something that Little Rock should be really proud of. There were 13 sites picked to get saplings from the tree that Anne Frank wrote about in her diary. And Little Rock got 2 of them, one for Central High, one for the Presidential Library. That ought to tell you something about the message that all of you have been sending out across America and the world in the last few years. I was ecstatic, and I had nothing to do with it. I'm here to brag on the rest of you. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I hope that environmentally we will continue to make a difference. The Presidential Center was the first federally maintained facility in the country to get a LEED rating, Leadership in Environmental and Energy Design, by the U.S. Green Building Council. And now, because of our neighbor Heifer, we are the only 2 office buildings anywhere in America, and I think anywhere in the world, that are next to each other and both have platinum LEED buildings ratings, the highest there are. And so I thank our friends at Heifer, and I hope that this is the continuation of something important. Governor Beebe has really put a lot of emphasis on this. I think Arkansas now has 15 buildings with LEED ratings in some way or another. I was talking to Rahm Emanuel the other day at the White House, and I said, I don't think you should ever allow another federal building to be built that's not a platinum LEED building. Somebody wants a courthouse, tell them to come up with a design. I mean, I also am very grateful that we've been able to bring a lot of important conferences here. And I hope we can do a better job of that in the next 5 years. Having this Slate 60 conference of really aggressive philanthropists from all over America come here every year has been particularly important. But this year I thought was in some ways the most important one, because this year philanthropists came from all over the country and talked about in Little Rock why, even with the explosion of non-governmental activity all over America, we still drastically underfund projects in small towns and rural Americas. No matter how great the need is, most philanthropy is still going to our urban areas. And yet the poorest Americans are the Native Americans on tribal lands who don't have casinos. The next poorest Americans are the African Americans in the Mississippi Delta. The third poorest Americans are the Hispanic Americans in rural areas in South Texas, followed closely by Appalachia. Now, are there more poor people in Harlem, where my office is and where I do a lot of work? Yes. But we had a whole conference for the first time, at least in my experience, where all these people who give away massive amounts of money and talk to others who do the same came here to figure out what we could do to get people to focus on the opportunity that exists in rural America and the absence of philanthropists filling that opportunity. We also have several times had our Healthy Schools Forum here, and that's really important to me. I think we are making some progress in turning around America's #1 public health epidemic, childhood obesity, and Little Rock will have an important part of that, because getting all these schools involved is a big, big deal. We now have 75% of the schools in America are part of our beverage agreement that my foundation made with the soft drink industry. And in those schools, the caloric content, aggregate content of beverages for sale to students has gone down 58%. And the caloric content of the snack foods in the machines in those schools that are part of our agreement with the snack food industry has gone down 40%. We have more and more of these schools involved in innovative, low-cost, high-impact programs to improve the health and wellness, as well as the healthy eating of the students, the teachers, and the staff. We try to include everybody in this. So I'm very grateful for the role the library has had. I want to say 2 specific things about the future of the library, and then close by asking you to just think about how this fits into what's going on in America and the world today. The 2 specific things I want to say are these. Number 1, although not all the funding has yet been secured, we're close, and we are going to begin on the Rock Island Railroad bid project in 2010, just as soon as we can clear it. I want to thank the governor, the state, the city of Little Rock and North Little Rock, Pulaski County, Axiom, Bicycle Advocates of Central Arkansas, especially Steve Bentley and Corrine Fraser, and the many other public and private entities for supporting this project. Once this major river trail link is complete, Central Arkansas will have one of the finest urban trail systems in the country. And if we do it right, and I've tried to be just as persnickety about this design as I was about the library, this will have a visual impact on people who see it, this bridge, in the day and at night, that will make Little Rock truly uniquely identifiable, and will make sure nobody ever forgets what they saw when they came here or they saw a picture in a book. I think it's really important. The second thing I want to say is, we need to begin thinking now about when we need to redo the exhibits, what else we need to do. I'm thinking about I'm glad we got this LEEDS rating, but I'll never be fully satisfied here until this whole area is self-contained in terms of the production of clean energy or being more efficient. I like the exhibits we've had, but I don't know if we had there's something big we've overlooked. And I say that to make my second announcement, which is really a request. We want to do better. We want to get better. We want to serve more people. We want more people to come here. We want it to be more accessible. We want it to be more educational, and we want it to be more fun. So if you have any of you have any ideas for us about what we could do over the next 5 years, what do you think we need to redo some of the exhibits? What do you think we need to try to calibrate the special programs we have with big things going on in the country? Should we have had a special thing on the financial crisis when we had a financial crisis? Should we had one of our members of Congress, thank goodness, had a health care forum here at the library, and I was proud of that. But should we have had something which invited everybody from the most ardent supporters of health care reform to the people who were charter members of the Tea Party crowd to come and have a civil discussion in the library about what the options are? I want to know what you think we can do to be a better neighbor, to be a better partner, to be a better educator, to do this job better. And I want you to send your suggestions to us at the library, and I promise you they will all be taken very seriously. Now, let me just say one final thing about where we are at the end of coming to the end of the first decade of this new century. As I said earlier, I wanted to build this library so that people would come through here and leave and say, you know, I never voted for that guy. I didn't even necessarily agree with what he did, but I tell you what, there really are consequences to elections. There really are consequences to who's in government. It matters who does what. It's just not true that cynicism is not an option. It is not true that what they do doesn't matter. And I think we did a pretty good job of telling the story. And I think we did a pretty good job of building a bridge to the 21st century. But I see now our country debating a little bit in the healthcare context, in the energy context, and lots of other areas. What is our purpose? Where are we going? And I want you to think about this. The purpose of the library's history part is to show the power of the people to select elected officials who can do good things that enable us all to go forward together. The purpose of the Clinton School, of the work we've done to promote City Year, of all the work I do with AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, with the Clinton Global Initiative, bringing people together, is to show the power of private citizens to do public good. And both are important. And I sometimes worry when I read just the press every day that we may not understand the constant stakes and the constant imperative of changing in the world in which we live. And I just want you to think about this. Everywhere I go, I say to people, we live in an interdependent world. It is good and bad. Interdependence simply means divorce is not an option. We cannot get away from each other. What we do will affect each other. When I was in the Middle East, I told them, I said, you know, I haven't changed my view on this at all. The geography is still the same. This is a small place. You can't get away from each other. The demography of this is the same. There are more Palestinian babies being born than Israeli Jewish babies. Therefore, soon you will have to decide whether to make a peace agreement or not, and then if you don't, then someday before you know it, the Israeli Jews will be in the minority in their own country, and they will either no longer be a Jewish state, or they will deprive the majority of the right to vote, and they will no longer be a democracy. And finally, I said, you know, there's this funny thing about technology. It keeps getting better. When I was elected president, the average cell phone weighed 5 pounds. There were 50 sites on the internet. There have been more than that added since I've been talking. The Israelis went into Gaza with a military operation that most of us were fairly sympathetic with in the beginning, because we could all imagine what it would be like to live in a neighborhood and have rockets raining down all the time. But there were a whole lot of rockets fired and just a few people killed. Just a matter of time till those rockets all have GPS positioning systems on them, and then a very few rockets will kill a whole lot of people. And so I was saying that just to make this point about interdependence. The whole future of our children and grandchildren is going to be determined by whether the interdependence of our lives is more positive than negative. Can we reduce inequality of opportunity? Can we reduce all the instability manifested in everything from the financial crisis to the fear of terrorism to the fear that comes when there's not enough swine flu vaccine to go around? Can we deal with the sustainability challenge that is clearly there with climate change? This is the first time in 20 years this year when the global economy went down and greenhouse gas emissions still went up, because the growth was so big in India, China, and these other emerging countries. And what are we going to do about all this? Relax, I'm not going into a whole speech. I'm going to tell you how you should think about it in closing, because that's what this is about. I think the whole future, and this is what I want the library, why I think it's so important for the library to hammer home the importance of choices. I think our future really depends on whether we face up to the evident challenges we have, and it's always hard. A lot of you remember that when I ran for president, I used to quote my professor of ancient civilizations, Carroll Quigley, who said that the most important defining characteristic of Western civilization in general, and the United States in particular, was the idea of future preference, the idea that the future could be better than the present, and that all of us have a personal responsibility to make it that way. And I can't tell you how many people came up to me then, some still today, to talk about that. Because one thing I know for sure, it's not poverty that breaks people, it's the conviction that you can't make tomorrow different from yesterday that breaks people. That's what breaks people, the idea that you can't escape. Whatever it is, you're in a blind alley. Well, Quigley used to say something else that I don't think I've ever talked about, but it's weighing on me now as the Congress debates health care and energy. And as the president tries to work out a new relationship with China and makes this absolutely imponderable decision about Afghanistan. And I can tell you, I'm going to support it, whatever it is, just because he took enough time to look into it. There is no way of knowing what the consequence will be. This is one of those deals where whichever way you go, there's a 50% chance it won't work out. And that's what you hire presidents to do, to look at all the facts and make the hard calls. But what I want to tell you is the second thing Quigley used to say is this. It really impressed me. I was 18 years old the first time I heard this. He said, a country like the United States cannot get rich and stay rich unless it builds institutions. If you don't have institutions, then you can't aggregate money, you can't aggregate people, and you can't build systems so that you tell those young kids that were so wonderful singing the national anthem, they're in a system now, right? You saw it. They're uniformed, they sang well, they're going to get a good education, and it means that there will be a predictable result for the efforts that they make. The stuff you take for granted. You knew you wouldn't get food poisoning when you ate lunch. It never occurred to you that water wasn't safe to drink. Now, in poor countries where I spend most of my time, nobody takes any of that for granted. We have to build capacity for them, systems. And increasingly, instead of just trying to give people inexpensive AIDS medicine or tuberculosis medicine or malaria medicine, we actually go out in rural areas and try to build elemental health systems. Poor people need capacity. They need systems. They need the ability to put things together so that the intelligence and effort they make, the intelligence they have, the effort they make can be rewarded. Rich countries have the opposite problem. The problem with rich countries is not the lack of capacity, it is rigidity. They've had the institutions for so long that the people running them have forgotten what they were set up to do in the first place and are more interested in preserving the prerogative of the institution than advancing the purpose for which the institution was established. It has been a common problem since the dawn of civilization. This is not an indictment of anybody, and you don't have to have one bad person in any single institution that is doing more harm than good just because they can't imagine changing anymore. I'm in a big argument, me and a lot of us who have offices in New York, with the New York City Teachers Union, and the leaders are great friends of Hillary's and mine, but they're against expanding the charter school movement, even though they run 2 charter schools. And even though we have 20 times as many applicants as we have positions for kids in these schools, in many of them. To me, that's a classic example of an institution fighting against change because it may change the institution, but it will further the purpose for which the institution was established. I want you to think about in this healthcare debate and this energy debate whether that's so. There are just a couple of things that you can't get around. We're spending 16.5% of our income on healthcare, and the next most expensive system in the world in a rich country is Switzerland at 11.5%. Next most expensive is Canada at 10.5%, and everybody else is between 9 and 10% of income. Twice in a row now, in an international evaluation of the health outcomes, we've ranked 35th. Colombia, with all the drug lords and only spends 5% of their income, is ranked 22nd. Now, part of this is misleading because we have a lot of immigrants here, a lot of poor people who can't get coverage right away. Part of it is cost versus benefit. And we're great at some things. We're really great at heart surgeries, otherwise somebody else would be giving this talk today. We're great at the diagnosis and treatment of cancer in a quick way. We are great at some things. But we've got to get our heads out of the sand. We cannot, you know what, 6%, the average difference of what we spend and our wealthiest competitors is a little over 6% of our income. You add 6.5% of $14.7 trillion, I think, is about $900 billion a year. Suppose I said to you this, Arkansas, you've been wonderful to me, you've always been with me. I just can't live with the 22nd Amendment anymore. I've got to run for a 3rd term for president. And I'm going to try to, wait. Listen to this. This is serious. So I'm going to propose to change, but I think I owe it to the American people to tell them why I am taking this unusual step. So here's my platform. If you will elect me president just one more time, the first thing I'm going to do is put a $900 billion tax on you. That's my program. And then I know you can't imagine what $900 billion is really like, so I'm going to have the government actually print the money, all $900 billion in cold cash, and I'm going to put it on automated flatbeds and strew it out over the entire Capitol Mall. And we're going to have this ceremony on national television. Then I will have myself a motorized stepladder, and I will motor myself from one end of our $900 billion to the other, sprinkling kerosene on it. And when I get to the end, I'm going to set it afire and let you watch it burn. Vote for me. How many votes do you think I'd get? If you don't want anything done about health care, that's your position. That is what you are advocating. That is your position. Now, If you're on the receiving end of the 900 billion, maybe that's all right, but I'm telling you, you read all that stuff about the president going to China and the tone and the back and forth and everything. Under President Bush's policies, we doubled the debt of the country. Now we had to increase it some more because of the stimulus was necessary. China has $2.2 trillion in cash, and about $1 trillion of it is invested in our debt. We borrowed the money from them to fight in Afghanistan and Iraq and pay Bill Clinton's tax cut and pay whatever government bills we've got. This is killing us, folks. Even if you are cold-blooded and don't care about all those people, those 500,000 Arkansans nearly that don't have health insurance. And all those hospitals, as Dean was telling me, who have unpaid bills. You could cut the reimbursement rate, and a bunch of hospitals in Arkansas would come out ahead if 100% of people paid all of a sudden. So I'm not advocating for any specific thing. I don't want to get into the details. I'm just telling you, as citizens, we got to be in the change business when our institutions no longer further the purpose for which they were established. And the same thing is true of energy. There are more than 90 countries that are more energy efficient than we are. It sounds like a gagging challenge to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050, but there have been 3 studies that say we could get half of it done just by being more efficient. And since it broke in the New York Times today, I'm free to talk about it. I sent a letter to the president's economic team and his chief of staff with a proposal that I believe would create 1 million jobs inside a year by simply changing the way we finance retrofitting all of our big buildings in America. And then in the year after that would create another 1 million or more in doing the same thing with homes. You just think about it, how many people we could put to work. You don't have to agree with my proposal. The point I'm trying to make is we have 2 options here. We can fight about how we're not really burning up the planet, and if you don't think we are, you might be right, but only 5% of the people who are in this scientific field agree with you. And I'm not willing to put my daughter and the grandchildren I hope to have their future in the hands of 5% when the 95% are advocating something that we can do and create jobs and bring America's economy back and revolutionize the whole future. Now, those are just 2 examples. We also have to deal with the delivery system in higher education. Here's the worst economic statistic that most Americans don't know. From World War II to 2001, we always ranked first in percentage of young adults with 4-year college degrees. In this decade, we have fallen to 10th. That should scare the living daylights out of you. Now, we're in a good position to catch up now because the unemployment rate's so high, we got more people in community colleges than we've ever had. And if we can get the pipeline working again, we can fix this. But we're going to have to do some innovative things. And when the economy comes back, in my opinion, we're going to have to do something about the deficit and the debt, because I don't think it's good for our national security to keep borrowing all this money from China or anybody else. I think the balanced budget program worked better for us economically, and I think most of you do too. And so if the president and the Congress want to do unpopular things to cut spending once we have recovered, I will support it. The point I'm trying to make is I spend my life now in places like Haiti, where we're having a great time down there, but we got to build them things that you take for granted. They don't have institutions, and that's why they suffer. America's in trouble today because we do have institutions that served us superbly for decades, but they have not changed to keep up with the times. And I hope when people go to this library and they see what happened with welfare reform, what happened with criminal justice reform, what happened with the budget reform, and lots of other things, they'll say, you know, maybe we ought to take a flying leap here. America is around after more than 230 years because when we had to change, we did it. And so I leave you with that thought. The legacy of this library is the American people can always be forever young as long as they're not afraid to do what the times demand. Thank you, and God bless you.